So Iran's pretty happy right now, and why wouldn't they be? I mean, by most accounts, they're getting everything they could possibly want and more from the United States in this current round of negotiations, which is a little bit surprising because most senior U.S. officials have drawn a pretty hard line in terms of what we're looking for out of Iran. And, based off the reports coming out of yesterday's talks in Oman, seems like we've just dropped most of those demands, if I'm being honest. What we're seeing right now looks to be the JCPOA, or Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action 2.0. It's what the Obama administration put in place back in 2015 or 16, whether you think it was good, bad, or somewhere in the middle. The Trump administration walked away from it, saying that it was bad, and it looks like that's back on the table. And I'm not the only one saying that. We're getting that from a lot of senior policy officials, not just in the United States, but abroad as well. In fact, let's put up a graphic here from the Institute for the Study of War, where they said, quote, anti-regime Iranian media reported that the Iran proposed a three-stage nuclear deal that capped Iranian uranium enrichment but preserved Iranian nuclear infrastructure, such as advanced centrifuges. The reported plan does not include a timeline for the phases of the deal. An unspecified senior Iranian official told Reuters that Khamenei will refuse any deal that requires Iran to dismantle centrifuges, halt uranium enrichment, and reduce its stockpile below JCPOA levels. And this should not have been a big shock because just a couple days ago, before these talks kicked off, there was a report in Reuters that Iran had laid out their red lines. And remember in a previous video, we said Khamenei made a note. He said, we know our red lines. We know the U.S. red lines. All is good. And I jokingly said, I have no idea what any of the red lines are. But, to our benefit, Iran laid these out. And they said there will be no dismantling of centrifuges for enriching uranium. There will be no reductions in their stockpiles of enriched uranium. There will be no stop to the enrichment process and no negotiating at all on their ballistic missile program. Which is, look, depending on who you listen to inside the administration, we've got Secretary of Defense Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz just within the last couple of weeks saying everything has to go, to include the Iranian missile program and their support of proxy forces across the region, which I guess isn't even being brought up in some of these notes. Iran has gone in the complete other direction and said, we heard all of that, and the answer to all of that is no. Thanks for playing. Now, it's not just the last couple weeks from Secretary of Defense Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Just a few days ago, after the first series of negotiations, we heard something very similar from Republican Senator Tom Cotton talking about how we're actually going to be able to deal with this Iranian threat. Here, let's give it a listen.
President Trump has repeatedly said for 10 years, we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This is not just a threat to Israel or the Middle East. This is a threat to the United States. They're developing ballistic missiles that could reach the United States itself within just a few years. So that's why President Trump left the Obama nuclear deal in his first term, because it was so weak. The only way to get a better deal is to say no enrichment of uranium, no ballistic missiles, no support for terrorism. President Trump has been clear about the terms of that deal. He's also been clear about the consequences. We want a diplomatic deal that takes Iran's nuclear program away, but if not, then there'll have to be military action because the threat, as you say, is so imminent. Just weeks or months away from enough uranium to create a nuclear weapon, maybe just a couple years away from a missile that could hit the United States.
Additionally, this past week, another Republican senator, Ted Cruz, came out saying, quote, anyone urging Trump to enter into another Obama-Iran deal is giving the president terrible advice. Trump is entirely correct when he says Iran will never be allowed to have nukes. His team should be 100% unified behind that. And it's hard for me to say that the entire administration is behind that, just because we're seeing these mixed messages. Now, in terms of what the United States should be looking for entering these negotiations, we have a segment here from Benem bin Talblou, my apologies in the pronunciation, who runs the Iran program at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Let's give that a listen.
What really will determine success, and if the president will have a good legacy on this, is the framework of a deal that he offers, and that'll be up to his chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff. If the framework is closer to the 2013 and 2015 Obama-era nuclear deals that kicks the can down the road, well, the president is not going to look great on this one, particularly because that's exactly what Iran is trying to put him into, that trap. Instead, if the president retains his dismantlement framework as articulated by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth or National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, well, then certainly he's going to come out of this looking good. But no doubt it's going to take much more than just Saturday to negotiate a deal, whether it's a good a deal or a bad deal.
All right, so that's kind of, the hawkish view inside the United States of how we should approach the Iran question. But let's move into what actually came out of this most recent round of talks. The Oman Foreign Ministry issued a statement, and this is where the talks were held. We're in Oman. They were the mediating party, if you will. And they said both Iran and the United States have agreed to enter into the next phase of their discussions that aim to seal a fair, enduring, and binding deal which will ensure Iran completely free of nuclear weapons and sanctions, and maintaining its ability to develop peaceful nuclear energy. According to the statement, the next round of talks will be held in the next few days in Oman. And with that, let's head over to some U.S. reactions. And look, I want to set the stage here. I had a very hard time. I've not been able to find U.S. reactions that are positive right now, that are saying this is a good step in the right direction. They might be out there, and maybe it's just my lack of research ability. But by and large, what I've been able to find is people that are essentially saying, why are we going back to the same deal that we had in the first place? Or the more hawkish approach here that we're going to get into in a second is saying, hey, that one was really bad. We should not do that thing again. In fact, the only arguments that I can find in support of the current kind of direction this is going is coming from Iranian media. But we are going to get into that here in a second as well. But starting with U.S. reactions, Mark Dubowitz, the CEO of Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Again, this is going to be a relatively hawkish view towards the Iran nuclear program. He says, quote, the Omani statement is deeply troubling. If accurate, U.S. negotiators may have agreed to Iran maintaining its ability to develop peaceful nuclear energy. That could mean Washington has already conceded on enrichment and centrifuges, the very tools the Islamist regime needs to build nuclear bombs at the time of its choosing. Tehran is holding firm to its red lines. No deal without these capabilities. The fact that talks are moving forward may suggest that the U.S. already has abandoned its own. Namely, President Trump's demands for the full and verifiable dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. Let's hope that's not the case. Again, that's kind of the argument of that deal wasn't good the first time around. Why are we thinking that it's going to be good this time around? It's the same issues are still at the core of the deal. And back here to Ben Talblou, the Iran program director at FDD, he said, quote, the question remains, what is Washington's endgame and has its position already collapsed? Tehran seeks to avoid the Libya and UAE models, aiming instead for a JCPOA type deal, a major political defeat for the Trump administration. Iran is stalling to ease sanctions, avert snapback, and delay a military strike. If the United States is serious, it must engage while amplifying, not easing, Iran's strategic fears to compel real concessions. Now, the general view in Iran right now is that their tactics are working. And it's, again, you can see why, based off kind of the shift in the U.S. statements just in recent weeks, where it went from absolutely no nuclear program at all, complete dismantlement, the Libya model, which was something Netanyahu said. I don't think I've actually heard that from a U.S. official, but nonetheless, that direction versus now, how about we just do the thing that we used to have? But it's not entirely clear just going back to the JCPOA is even something that Iran wants to do. In fact, their foreign minister, Argachi, I know I'm always saying that wrong, coming out of these negotiations said, quote, we made clear how many in Iran believe that the JCPOA is no longer good enough for us. For now, optimism may be warranted, but only with a great deal of caution. So even hey, remember this exact document that we had in 2015, 2016? Iran saying, actually, we're looking for a little bit more. What more you got? Now, turning over to some Iranian reactions here as published in Iran International. First off, there's a video circulating yesterday supposedly showing Iranians in the northern portion of the country spray painting in English, Trump, don't abandon us, long live Iran, things like that. I can't verify the authenticity of this stuff, but I think it does highlight or just maybe a reminder to us all that there are split factions inside of Iran. You've got the hardliners and then the relatively reformist side inside of Iran. And tying into or getting into their reactions here, Iran International reports, quote, while reformist outlets welcomed what they described as swift progress and a move towards technical level discussions, conservative dailies backed the negotiation team, but renewed warnings against what they called U.S. hostility and external opposition. Quote, if external spoilers are kept at bay, this can lead to tangible gains for the Islamic Republic. And then they have they quoted the hardline Kaihan paper here, which they say is viewed as reflecting the supreme leader's position, struck a defiant tone. In a lengthy commentary, they say it warned that negotiations were historically a tool of colonial pressure and argued that only military and nuclear strength had forced the United States to the table. Now, you're always going to get that in any sort of deal is Iran needs to say, hey, they came to us. We set the stage for these types of negotiations. But there are some pieces here where they actually have something tangible to point to. In fact, in another piece, Kaihan talked about this, saying that excluding Europe and regional states in the talks had allowed Iran to slow the pace and avoid compromise, saying that indirect talks humiliated the United States, reinforcing Tehran's standing. And again, it's this minor stuff in diplomatic circles, but when these talks were first announced, Iran said, we are not going to talk to you directly because we don't trust you. You set up this JCPOA and then you backed out. So why would we believe, and myriad of other U.S. policies towards Iran that have changed in all sorts of different directions over the last 8, 12, 16, 20 years. So that's the Iran stance, is we don't trust you. We're going to have a third party in the room that's going to help kind of navigate these talks. And the United States has been saying, no, we have to talk one-on-one. That's the only way we're going to get this done. And Iran got their way. So right now there's mediators. The Oman team is mediating this, so they're pointing to that as evidence that they've got the upper hand so far in these negotiations. And lastly here, they say U.S. enmity towards the Islamic Republic would persist regardless of the outcome. This is the Hardline newspaper saying, quote, the world is watching a diplomatic clash between satanic and divine powers as resistance to diplomatic means continued. So, big picture, we've got this thing moving towards the JCPOA, but there's hardliners in Iran saying, yeah, that ain't good enough. This isn't even close to good enough. And you got to be careful because the Americans are going to trick us. And they, again, kind of have something valid to point to that we walked away from the last agreement. But nonetheless, as it sits right now, unless there's some kind of rapid change in the United States posture, it looks an awful lot like we're getting ready to make a deal that may or may not be a good deal, but it's going to be pretty similar to the one we had in place before. For the sake, personal opinion here, it feels like we're getting ready to make a deal in order to say that we made a deal. I don't know how we're going to tiptoe around the fact that this is kind of the one that is like almost word for word the exact one that was already in place that Trump has chastised and said was so bad and so dangerous and we had to get away from it. So there'll be some, maneuvering there, I'm sure, but that as of now seems like it's the direction we're headed in. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.